Welcome to the Birth Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Hof, BSN RN. I am a wife, a mother of two, and a nurse specializing in the care of women and newborns. In this podcast, we will share powerful journeys of birth givers with the goals of lifting the veil on the birth experience, healing through sharing, and beginning an open conversation to strengthen trust and promote transparency between birthing people and healthcare providers. Welcome to the Birth Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Hof, BSN RN. I am a wife, a mother of two, and a nurse specializing in the care of women and newborns. In this podcast, we will share powerful journeys of birth givers with the goals of lifting the veil on the birth experience, healing through sharing, and beginning an open conversation to strengthen trust and promote transparency between birthing people and healthcare providers. Today, I have with me Jane Slomski, LCSW. Jane is a licensed clinical social worker with over 10 years counseling experience, specializing in the parenting journey of families with children, adolescents, and young adults. Jane is the mother of a baby girl, and she is here today to share her birth experience with us. Jane, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I have a baby girl. She was born June 24th, 2022. So she's about almost 2 months now. I had a rather uneventful pregnancy, no complications or anything like that. Nothing strange, quote unquote, happened until I got to the birth and labor and delivery and postpartum. I have a physical disability. I have a very mild cerebral palsy, which primarily affects my legs. I have a strange walking gait. I don't use any assistive devices to walk. I also have a fair bit of white coat syndrome because of some trauma that I've experienced as a child. I have a hard time with medical professionals, doctors, hospitals, that kind of thing. So knowing that about myself, I tried to pick an OB that I was very comfortable with, really was very nervous about the whole situation. And then because I have CP, we made the decision together, my doctor and me, for me to have an elective C-section. So 3:00 in the morning on June 24th, I woke up, my water broke, and my husband and I went to the hospital. So they already knew, oh, this is an elective C-section, and I saw my doctor, and that went pretty well. It wasn't as traumatizing as it could have been. I kind of knew what to expect, although I will say that having the spinal block, not feeling anything below your boobs basically was an extremely unsettling process. They also did tell me that it was going to wear off after 2 hours, and that ended up not to be true at all. So they wheeled me into post-op, and that went fine, and recovery. And we went up to the postpartum area. 12 hours after I gave birth, they were like, okay, we're going to take your catheter out. Fine. And I'd already kind of been up and walking around a little bit, but I was very, very stiff from the spinal block. They took the catheter out and they said, okay, next time you have to go to the bathroom, let us know. We'll come and help you to the bathroom. So that was about midnight when I finally said, okay, I got to go to the bathroom. Of course, it's the middle of the night. I had 3 nurses come in and they helped me to the bathroom. They had me kind of supporting myself on an IV pole with wheels. What happened then was that apparently I went one way and the IV pole with wheels went the other way, and I fell. I don't know if you've ever fallen in a hospital before, but they take that very seriously. As a person with cerebral palsy, I've grown up with this. I've been through 12 years of physical therapy myself. I'm not a big stranger to falling. So for me, this was like, ugh, crap. For them, it was like, oh my God, the world has ended. And so they gave me a yellow wristband and they put me in a yellow gown, and they're like, you can't get out of bed ever again. You have to have us with you at all times if you want to get out of bed. And my legs are stiff because of the spinal block, which I was not expecting. I was expecting a little bit of muscle stiffness, but not anything like what I experienced. I couldn't bend my knees at all. So because I couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't move my legs at all. So I was stiff. And then right there, of course, that's the time that they want me to also go to the bathroom. At this point in the experience, I still have to really pee really bad. So they helped me to the bathroom with a walker. Then all 3 nurses stood in the bathroom and stared at me and refused to let me pee alone. It's now 1:00 in the morning. I am traumatized because I fell. It scared me. My legs are already stiff because they were stiff before. Now my anxiety is so bad that I'm stiffer and I can't go to the bathroom. And I already have kind of a shy bladder. And so I find it hard to go in medical settings. I always have. And so I have these 3 nurses staring at me. At this point, I'm sitting on the toilet and I'm crying. I'm like, I just want to go home. Just leave me alone. And they're like, we can't leave you alone. You might fall. And I'm like, I'm sitting on the toilet. And I said, well, can you just let my husband come in? Well, he can't come in because he's not a hospital employee. And at that point, I'm sobbing. I am literally sobbing on the toilet and I cannot go to the bathroom. And my husband took charge and he kicked them out of the bathroom. He told them, this is not helpful, but I was not able to, even after all that, it was just too much. And I asked them to reinsert my catheter. I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this anytime soon. Just please put it back in. So at that point, now I have like 5 or 6 nurses plus the doctor on call in the room with me, reinserting a catheter, which apparently after birth is a lot more difficult than before a birth. Everything is swollen. It was terrible. I go back to sleep. Kind of. At that point, I think I'd not slept in almost 24 hours. I was unable to really sleep that night at all because I was so upset about the whole experience. And then, of course, because I'm a fall risk, they put an alarm on my bed. So then every time I literally moved for the rest of the night, it went off and nurses would come in and be like, oh my God, are you okay? Including when I tried to get the bed to sit up to eat breakfast the next morning. That's all I wanted to do was eat breakfast. And it set the alarm off and people came in and just, oh my God, are you okay? At that point, I am just fed up. I'm humiliated. I'm crying all the time because I'm hormonal. I just want to focus on my baby, who I did send to the nursery that night. And I'm really glad that I did that, but I couldn't focus on her. I couldn't focus on my family. I was just trying to figure out my own body and getting out of bed. And I was scared because I couldn't move. And I didn't know how long it would take for it all to wear off. So the next morning they sent in one of the anesthesiologists who said, well, you have all your feeling back in your legs, which I did. So I'm not really worried about you. It's just going to take some time for it to all come back. Great, but they've told me I can't get out of bed. So I don't know how you're expecting me to move. Well, we need a PT consult. I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. But having been through PT already in my life and knowing my own body, I was like, I need to get up and walk more. And they're like, okay, when a nurse comes in, she can help you walk. Well, that amounted to getting up and walking across the room and walking back to the bed. And then having to lie down again because they couldn't stay with me for an hour every day to help me walk. And they wouldn't let my husband do it again. That was Friday into Saturday. Saturday, I pretty much stayed in bed. I had one nurse at the hospital who came in during that day and said, okay, we're going to get you out of bed and we're going to move you around and I'm going to help you sit up. And because at that point, all I wanted to do was sit up and not lay down in bed and have my legs kind of hanging over the edge and stuff. And she's like, that's absolutely what we can do. And I had one nurse who did that. Everybody else, because of course the day shift nurse changes every 12 hours or so, they all acted like they couldn't touch me. They were worried about my legs. They asked me really silly questions, honestly, like, well, is this your baseline? And I'm like, I was 8.5 months pregnant 24 hours ago, and I walked in here to give birth. No, it is not my baseline. And I would have told you if it was. And do you see any assistive device or anything? And so they're just completely clueless. I'm trying to tell them and I need to walk. And they're like, you need to stay in bed because basically it was kind of a liability thing, I think. But also like, how are you expecting me to be discharged in 24 hours if I can't walk out of here? And so the PT comes in and she watches me walk with the walker and she says, well, you need to walk more. I'm like, yeah, I know. I am so frustrated. And I guess she said that to me, but then she didn't really communicate it to the nursing staff. So the next nurse who came in was like, no, you can't get out of bed. So this kept going on and on and on. It was like I would explain it to one nurse and then they would not talk to each other. And then the next nurse would come in and have no idea what the plan was and not expect me to walk. And so I called my aunt, who is a doctor in another city, and I was crying on the phone. And I was like, what do I do? And she said, you need to talk to a charge nurse and tell them what's going on, that you need to walk. And your husband needs to help you, and that's what needs to happen. So I talked to the nurse. And of course, I think she heard me, but she was also like, well, we have your safety in mind, and, you know, we're very concerned and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I know, I am also concerned. But at that point, it was probably Sunday night, and I was supposed to go home Monday morning, and I had not walked yet. And I'm like, I don't know what you expect to happen in the next 24 hours where I would magically be able to walk out of here. And then she goes, you could stay until Tuesday. And I'm sorry, no. I want to go home. I want to be with my daughter. This has already been a really triggering experience for me because I'd hate hospitals anyway. I'm in here exactly as long as I need to be, and I am gone, and you're not going to keep me. And so Monday morning, she did finally say, we can let your husband walk with you. And I had got a little bit of walking in Sunday, but really, truly, by the power in me was all that I can account for the way that I suddenly got up and walked Monday morning. I was like, I am getting out of here. And I'm taking my baby and we're going home. I don't remember walking out of the hospital. I know that I did it, but I don't know how I did it. I got home, walked into my house, and just collapsed on the couch. Within a week, I was walking probably 95% there, but it was much, much better than when I was in the hospital. Fortunately, my daughter was born healthy. There was no complications with her birth. She was wonderful. The C-section was uncomplicated. My incision healed very nicely. I was discharged from OB like a month ago. And I am very grateful for that. And unfortunately, what I expected for a postpartum experience was not what I got. And I mourned that even in the moment with my husband. I was most upset about, oh, I didn't want this to happen. This is exactly what I thought would happen, not to this extent, but because I'm not new to medical professionals and medical establishment. Unfortunately, this is a very common response to me as a patient when people see that I have cerebral palsy. They have a preconceived idea about what that looks like and what my abilities are. And I'm really familiar with that. And so when I got pregnant, I was like, oh boy, this is going to be a very difficult thing for me. And I had a really good experience up to that point. And then, as my aunt said, everything you thought was going to happen happened. And I'm so sorry that it happened that way. And I didn't have the sort of warm and fuzzy postpartum experience that I expected. I had a pretty traumatic one and have done a lot of my own therapy and counseling with it as a result. I did end up writing a letter to the hospital, to patient relations, letting them know this was probably not the best. It could have been different. These are the things I wish had happened. And it was not my intention to make the nursing staff feel bad or to more of a stress on them than I'm sure they're already under. I'm fully aware. Nursing staff is overworked and spread thin, and they have their other patients to attend to. So it wasn't my intention to burden them in any way, but that when a patient says, this is what I need, and this is my body, and I've been living in this body for a lot longer than you've known me, I wish they had listened. And I wish I'd had a more normal postpartum experience.
Thank you so much for sharing. That sounds very stressful. I wish I could go back, wave a magic wand, and fix it all for you. It also sounds kind of like an expected response, like you said, from the hospital, because everybody sounded like they were following the policy. Yes. Unfortunately, where you fit into that policy was not really considered, I think. It sounds like going forward, this is going to be something that might cause stress for you if you're planning on having any more kids. Is that correct?
I thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I talked to my OB about that, which was kind of a funny conversation because she goes, I think it was my second visit postpartum. And I was like, so when, given that I just had a C-section, when can I think about having another child? She's like, oh, it's a little early for that. And I said, oh no, I agree.
Yeah, that's fair. When people have traumatic experiences like that, I think definitely now is the time to start planning how that experience is going to go, because otherwise you're going to be real stressed out about it.
Yeah. One of the things that she recommended, and I agree, is to, first of all, I will know how the spinal block will affect me, which was kind of an unknown at that time before it happened. And she said maybe if they'd gotten PT in there first thing to assist you out of bed the first time, and then you'd have someone who really knows how to support you should you not be able to walk, which I agree. And then also knowing that I probably need more support getting out of bed the first time. But then I also have spoken to other people who said that the spinal block is an unknown for a lot of women, and it's not, your experience could have been related to your CP, but it also is a very invasive anesthesia. And so not all that surprising, period. And so I kind of would have appreciated had someone said, well, this is one of the many responses that is normal, the spinal block, like the kind you had, because they really just chalked it up to the physical disability, to my legs. And I'm over here thinking it's my problem, but I've heard from other people that that's not necessarily the case, that my CP could have made it worse, maybe possibly, but not necessarily.
I agree with all of that. You're definitely not the first person to fall after birth. I wonder, you said you had gotten up a couple of times before they pulled out the catheter. What was that experience? Where did they have you walk across the room?
Are you pregnant and planning a hospital birth? You don't need a birth plan. You need a birth vision. In my opinion, birth plans set you up for failure. Yep, I said it. Hear me out before you turn off this podcast. You may think that by downloading a generic birth plan, it means you're in control. The truth is, it's not that simple. No one can control exactly how their birth will go. There are way too many variables. What every pregnant person wants is to walk into the hospital pregnant and to walk out with a healthy newborn in their arms. The journey in between is the murky part. It's hard to know what issues might come up that need to be addressed. If you focus your energy on a birth vision rather than giving your power to a birth plan, you can empower yourself to make the best choices for you and your baby. That's why you need to get into my Empowered Hospital Birth program. As a labor nurse and mindset coach, I can help guide you through the process of maintaining the calm autonomy that will help you achieve the birth vision you desire. In my Empowered Hospital Birth program, I will help you identify the source of anxiety you have surrounding hospital birth. Fill in knowledge gaps to make sure that you are fully informed and confident. Learn key phrases so you can better communicate with your medical team. Emotionally process your fears so that they don't hold power over you. Go to kellyhof.com/empowered to book a free 30-minute private birth vision call, where we will identify your top fears and must-haves and gain clarity on exactly how you want to feel in the birth space. That's KELLYHOF.com/empowered. I'm honored to be a part of your birth journey.
They had me walk to the bathroom and back, and I was using the IV pole both times. I wouldn't say I was super steady. I was very, very, very stiff. My legs were stiff, but I didn't fall, which maybe gave them a false sense of security, oh, she's fine. But then, of course, my aunt was saying IV poles are not really meant to support people. They roll. That was my experience. Was I expected to go the same way it went the other two times. I think that was a surprise for all of us. But then, of course, I fell and they wouldn't let me get up before they checked my vital signs. They call in the on-call doctor, who is a guy that I've never met before. I don't know if he's just a general physician or if he's an OB. They didn't check my incision. or anything like that. He started asking my husband questions like, does she have high blood pressure? Does she have low blood pressure? Did she lose consciousness? Like all these very strange questions. And my husband's like, no, she didn't lose consciousness. She doesn't have high blood pressure. She doesn't have low blood pressure. She fell because her legs are stiff. There was so much not communicated about how I felt and what the circumstances were. And I'm just over here sleep deprived and traumatized. So he barely spoke to me. That has me going on another kind of rant about my preference for female physicians in this case, because I don't have those experiences mostly with female physicians. But that in itself was very traumatizing. And then just the fact that that had happened after 2 kind of successful trips to the bathroom. But it could happen anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. It can happen anytime to anyone. Everybody reacts differently to the spinal. I prefer medical professionals that are able to talk to the patient, whether they're male or female. I feel like that's important.
My experience has been that has been overwhelmingly more women than men, but certainly not exclusive to women.
Yeah.
You know, I think as a therapist, I value that ability to talk to your patient, talk to your client. I appreciate my husband advocating for me, but I wish that he hadn't had to. I wish that they had spoken to me. When I wrote the letter to the hospital, I used the word infantilized and dismissed, and I really felt that way. And it was very disconcerting for a new mom who just gave birth. Why am I being treated this way? But then at the same time, it was kind of familiar territory for me because of the disability. People make assumptions based on the clinical picture they have of CP, which is not my clinical picture at all. I think that confuses people, but it's something that I've come up against nearly every medical establishment that I've ever set foot in. And I understand I'm not your average patient, but I'm also like, you can talk to me.
Yeah, it's definitely not fair that you have to deal with all of that and people's assumptions on top of the physical recovery and everything else that's going along with it. I feel like there's a couple of takeaways from the perspective of the medical community to remember that even though someone falls, there's still a human being that's trying to recover and focus on recovery. And it sounds like the biggest lack was the communication during this time. Because if one person had just talked to the team or put a plan of care or some sort of way for everyone to know that your job was to get up and walk with the walker and not to stay in bed, it sounds like a lot of this could have been resolved. Not avoided, because who knows why you fell. It could have nothing to do with the CP, like you're saying. It could have everything to do with the spinal, because it's something that I've seen happen, not very commonly, but it does happen. Some people just have that reaction to the spinal. Not sure if you're planning on delivering at the same hospital or with the same provider, but regardless of where you go, I think it would be beneficial perhaps to have a consult with anesthesia and with physical therapy even before going into this process, because to have them expecting and planning and scheduling some time with you to figure out the plan of care after you deliver, in case you do have stiffness and you need some additional help walking, and have you be a part of that plan of care rather than having you brushed aside after the fact while everybody's just sitting there scratching their heads and not consulting with you.
I will definitely use the same provider. They're very supportive before, during, and after. I'm probably one of the few people who planned for childbirth. At 29, I was like, okay, I can no longer go to see my mom's postmenopausal gynecologist. I need somebody who can deliver a baby at some point. And so I asked friends for a referral, and they referred me to a wonderful practice, and I would absolutely use them again. They've now been my doctors since I made that decision. So I had a very good relationship with the providers there. Before I gave birth, I was just going in for my yearly exams. So that was the easiest part of it, was this is my doctor. So they do only deliver at 2 hospitals, so I'm limited in that way, but they're good hospitals. I have no complaints about the medical care that I received there, and I would absolutely go again. I think I would absolutely go again now, and I would carry the letter that they sent to me back in my pocket, because I will tell you that the response from the hospital I was impressed. They apologized. They said, "We're sorry that we did not listen to you. And as a result of your feedback, we've implemented several training protocols with our nurses to help people to know how to block and help people with mobility issues in the postpartum unit. And I also made sure to give a lot of credit to the one nurse who was awesome. And I think she was that nurse who said, okay, Jane's plan is to walk. But that didn't happen until I'd been there for 2 days and I kind of raised my hand and said, hey, I need to talk to somebody. But overall, I would say, because I got the positive response from them, I would do it again. Until I got that response, I will tell you, I was like, I don't know if I want to do that again at that hospital. Yikes.
I don't think anybody would blame you for having that response, but I'm so happy to hear that they were accountable and implemented a plan. And
sounds like they did.
Yeah, I would hope that they would be very open to implementing some sort of personal plan ahead of time. Because that's not unheard of when you have somebody that has some extenuating circumstances and some additional medical challenges, that it's definitely good to have, okay, going forward, this may happen and this is how we're going to plan and prevent and do all the things to make sure that we have the recovery that we're looking for. And especially what breaks my heart is that you feel robbed of that postpartum experience. All that time where you get to cuddle your baby and skin to skin and breastfeed and all those normal mom activities. Was that just completely brushed aside? Did you get a lactation consult? How did that go for you?
I will say my initial plan was to breastfeed. And being a therapist and having my own background in child development, I was open to formula feeding. She did have some low glucose initially when she was born, and the nurse asked me post-op if they could give her formula, and I said, absolutely, whatever she needs, please give her. I was certainly open to formula, and I'm really glad that I was, because I ended up giving up breastfeeding. And the reason that I did give up breastfeeding was because of all the stuff that I was dealing with in the first 3 days. I remember thinking about breastfeeding and having the lactation consultants come in and not being able to absorb anything because I was so upset about the other stuff that was going on. And I just wanted to hold my baby and not talk to anybody except my husband. Please go away. Unless you are her pediatrician or my OB, I don't want to talk to you. And just really wanting that time. And I felt like because I fell and because they were worried about me, I got so much more attention than I wanted. And I hate that. I hated being the center of attention. And when I did tell the charge nurse that I need to talk to you about this because I fell, her response was, oh, yes, I did hear about that. And I'm like, oh, of course you did. So I was the woman on the ward who fell that everybody knew about. Oh, I hated being the center of attention, and it took away from the time I did get to spend with her. We were mostly rooming in, except for I did send her to the nursery after that because I was like, I just need to sleep. My husband and I just need to deal with me, and she's going to be okay. The nurses are going to take care of her, and it's going to be okay. But I wish that I had been able to spend more time and energy breastfeeding or even considering breastfeeding. I did have the lactation consultants, but they come in and they shoot all this information at you going 100 miles an hour. And I just was like, I can't handle it. And she didn't latch. She was not an easy breastfeeding baby. So she acted like she didn't like it. And I wasn't getting anything from it because I was so upset. And so I just opted for as much skin to skin as I could get with her and not worrying about whether or not I was producing enough. For the first 2 or 3 days, they had me try to hand express. I ended up with bruises all over me from them, not me. They're like pushing really hard. And so I remember my first shower that I took when I got home. I took all my clothes off. I looked in the mirror. I looked like I'd been in a war. Like my body is just covered in scar and bruising. And I'm looking at it. I'm going, oh my God. I wish that I'd had more time and energy to think about breastfeeding. It had been my plan, but it was so hard with everything else that I was going through that I said, no. It's got to give somewhere, and I can give that. I'm comfortable with formula. And so she's happy and she's fine and she's gaining on formula, and that's fine. We bond fine over a bottle. But I really wish that I'd had more mental space to have that time with her, to really focus on breastfeeding and have nothing else be problematic. And I didn't get that.
Yeah, I'm sorry that you were robbed of that experience. It sounds like you feel kind of forced to make that decision and forced to cope in that way. And while it's a decision that is just fine to make, I feel like it would have been much better for you to have just made the decision under normal circumstances instead of feeling like that's what you had to do in order to heal yourself. And additionally, I think sometimes the whole C-section experience can be kind of traumatizing physically because of your recovery. Sometimes stress is also one of those things that can make it difficult to produce breast milk. There was a lot going against you in that time. And I hope that maybe the next time there can be a better plan so that you can at least try to have that experience. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out.
I was comfortable making the decision that I made, but you're right. I wish that I had been able to be like, for reasons other than my own trauma.
Yes. And I'm sure she is happy and healthy. And absolutely you can bond over a bottle. Everybody that ever gives a bottle says that.
Right.
And a fed baby is the best kind of baby, regardless of, but if you wanted that experience, then I wish that you had had it a little bit better. There's so much that happens. Like when you're stressed out and traumatized, you can't retain anything.
Yeah. And being a therapist, it's interesting how you can be like cognizantly aware of that. And it doesn't stop it from impacting you. I get that from my clients all the time. How do you handle stress in your own life? You're a therapist, you have it all together. Oh, no. That's not true. Having the knowledge doesn't mean that my body or my brain responds to trauma any differently than the average person. When I was sitting on the toilet and crying, I remember even in that moment thinking, I am going to be so traumatized by this. I'm going to have to deal with this for the next 20 years.
You're texting your therapist right now and telling her, guess what? We've got some issues we're going to have to deal with. And I'm just being proactive right now.
I know it's 3:00 in the morning, but hi. Yeah.
I'm consciously watching myself unravel, and I just want you to be aware of the situation.
Exactly.
You can preemptively heal. I'm just sewing myself back up right now as we speak.
Exactly. It was like I was watching myself go through it and going, oh, crap. This is my new trauma. Not that we need any more. We never need more trauma. I feel like even the best laid plans, you can't foresee everything. And I feel like I planned for it the best that I could because I did talk to my OB about my past medical trauma and also my experiences with going to the hospital and being worried about that. And so she said, are you interested in having a consult with anesthesia? And at the time, I had so much else going on because it was my first pregnancy. And the only question that the anesthesiologist did ask me on the night that I went in was, do you have any hardware in your back? And I said, no, the only thing he cared about. He was the one who told me it would wear off in 2 hours, which is not true either.
You will start to regain feeling in 2 hours. That's what they mean.
I wish that he had said, you will start to regain feeling in 2 hours.
Words are important.
Again, I think as a therapist, I know that, and I expect everybody else to know that. I will say, talking about the anesthesiologist, it's 3:30 in the morning. You get what you get at 3:30 in the morning, the person who's on call. And he did his job, and he did it well. And that's all I can say. But the thing that was funny was by the time I go into surgery, it's like 5 o'clock. And so 6:30, 7 o'clock, I'm still in post-op and I'm starting to regain feeling, and my husband and I are laying there. He's holding the baby and we're talking. And I hear a couple come in, and it's post-op. So you have just curtains between you and the next person. So you can hear everything. And it was clearly a couple who'd come in for a C-section, and they had a different anesthesiologist. And the anesthesiologist they had is going through, well, first this will happen, and then you'll feel this, and then you'll feel that. And if you don't feel that, it's okay. And let me know if you feel this or that. And I will let you know when I'm doing this, this, and this. And then this will happen. And if any time you feel uncomfortable, let me know, blah, 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 right? I didn't get that talk. I got, do you have hardware in your back? No. Okay. So I remember I'm talking to my husband. I'm like, do you hear this? Do you hear this woman? And he's like, yeah. It's like, we didn't get that talk. I want that talk. Can I have that talk next time? Or maybe she can come in and give it to me now. As scary as the procedure was, because, if you've never been awake in an operating room before, it is weird. It was probably traumatizing to the average person. Not my first experience being awake in an OR. Unfortunately, I'd had a similar OR kind of awake experience when I was a kid. 9 years old, I was. So that was actually on the top of my list of things I might freak out about. Because I talked to my OB about that going in. I said, when I was 9, I was led into the OR without anybody telling me I was going to the OR. And I screamed bloody murder because I was 9. And I thought, well, here I am, a woman in my 30s. I know about trauma. I said, I don't know how it's going to hit my brain. I might consciously know that it's not a bad thing, but my brain might not. I don't know. And it actually ended up being okay. It was a very different experience being pregnant than going in for what I went in when I was 9. So, everyone was very excited and very like, okay, yeah, you're having a baby and that's cool. And everyone was very welcoming, and the nurses and doctors in labor and delivery were absolutely wonderful. And so all things considered, for me, because of my history, it wasn't, I think, as traumatizing as it could have been. I had a couple of moments where I felt like I couldn't breathe. I started going, and then I can't breathe. And my husband is kind of flipping out. And to their credit, everyone turned around and said, you're fine. We have you hooked up to monitors. It's because of the anesthesia, but we're monitoring you and you're fine. You can breathe. We're watching your oxygen levels. So it wasn't as terrible as it could have been, but it was definitely one of the things that I wish somebody had told me.
These are all very common things that happen during this process. The average person doesn't know this going in. You're not even the average person. You're in healthcare and you've been through a lot of medical procedures. And for this to be a shock to you says a lot about how we don't share enough with women about what these processes involve. And that, I feel like, is the biggest disservice, that there's not educational campaigns on what to expect. I mean, there's a whole book on what to expect when you're expecting, but why do we cast a veil over some of the scary parts? We could be preparing ourselves for that and make it less scary and make it more normalized. And I really wish that you and many, many other women that have been through this had that opportunity. And I thank you so much for sharing that, because now if it affects one person, if one person hears your story, their water breaks and they go in for a C-section and they feel like they can't breathe. A woman falls and has an experience. Now she knows how to advocate for herself. And maybe another nurse will hear this and think it's really important. Even myself, I need the reminder. It's really, like you said, we're stretched thin. And sometimes we get in our own heads as well because of our trauma. Obviously, you saw this. It was traumatizing for the medical staff when someone has a fall.
Yes, I did see that. And I remember feeling almost guilty. Like, I'm so sorry I added to your trauma. And at the same time, being like, not sorry because it wasn't my fault. I know that.
But you were able to do something to help an entire policy, it sounds like.
I hope so. And I make it clear in my letter that I'm not bashing anybody and I'm not putting blame on anyone. And it sounded like they were expecting me to do that, to blame somebody, like I would blame the nurses for my fall. First of all, I don't think it was anybody's fault. People fall, and more specifically, I fall all the time. And with anesthetic in my legs, of course, I was probably going to fall. And I don't know that anybody could have stopped it. But now we know what to expect. I'm just glad that I was able to write a letter and that they were able to hear it and not be defensive, and instead at least say that they were working on training and trying to change the policy, which I appreciate, but more so to think it's important for people to really listen. And I have many friends who are in the healthcare field, not just mental health, but also physical health professionals. And all of them kind of say the same thing. As a healthcare professional, I get stuck in my own head and I don't think about what I'm saying to the patient. And I realize that's a problem, the ones that really think about it. And you talk about the importance of a bedside manner. And I think it goes beyond, I mean, bedside manner is great and we should all have one. Explain it to me like I don't know, because I don't know. And explain it to me because I'm about to go through it. And it takes a lot for a person to just trust that medical professionals know what they're doing. And I'm going to put my life in your hands, and especially my semi-incapacitated body, because you've made it so I can't move. I can't do anything. And so there is a certain kind of helplessness that goes with that. And so if I know what to expect, then I'm going to be less traumatized. I'm going to be less upset by what happens, even if it's the best medical team in the world. And I really do think that I had a wonderful medical team, but it was still very traumatizing. I remember being in the OR and kind of realizing that everything was okay because I was reading their body language and nobody was freaking out. And so when I would start to panic or feel anxious or be like, well, what's going on? Or how much longer is this going to take? Or where is she? Is she okay? The fact that nobody was freaking out, I was like, okay, I know what an OR in chaos would look like. So this is not it. So that was very helpful. But if I had not had the presence of mind to read the body language in that moment, I don't know that I would have come away with that. Because the other thing they don't tell you about C-sections is that sometimes your baby doesn't take his or her first breath as quickly as a vaginal delivery. And my baby didn't scream or cry at all. She was quiet. And it scared me and it scared my husband. We're both sitting there like, is she okay? Is she okay? Because we didn't hear anything. I didn't even hear her come out. I just felt some pressure and I was like, what is that?
I had the same experience. That's very traumatizing. And you're reacting as a mom in that situation. You're not reacting with all of the education you've received. And so even if you did know that, it's terrifying.
It's terrifying, because you see it. The conventional wisdom is your baby cries and that's how you know it's okay. And that's not what happened. So there was a NICU nurse in there and she turned around and said, she's fine. She's just taking her time and she's apparently asleep. So
she did not get the memo that she was going to be born at that moment. And I'm sorry we interrupted her nap.
That's exactly what happened. So, yeah, she was taken immediately to the warmer and they were making sure she was okay. And they were helping her to breathe and gave her some oxygen. But I didn't know that was happening. And I'm over here incapacitated on the table. And my husband, they immediately were like, you come over here and see her. And I'm like, what's going on? Hello. You just took her away from me. Like, what's going on? So it was a little bit concerning, but they were very reassuring after that.
That's another challenge I've noticed. ORs were not necessarily built with bonding in mind. They just don't have a space necessarily. There's some places that will do skin to skin with the parent or with the mom even. But to do it with the mom requires an extra nurse. I don't know if you've seen the Facebook post talking about the charge of $30 for skin to skin.
Yes.
It's tacky to add that on, but that's a reality that in order to keep everyone safe when someone is on the operating table with a surgery going on, to maintain sterility and make sure that the baby doesn't fall and to be able to actually do skin to skin immediately under a drape that's up where you would be putting it's basically neck to skin if you're going to do skin to skin with a baby in the OR.
Right.
So it's hard. And we have a lot of work to do as a medical community to try to catch up with a lot of these trends. And that's another reason that I want everybody to tell their story, because I completely get the mistrust that I think a lot of people have going in. There's still a lot of work that we need to do to make it a more welcoming place for a safe, and see, that's the thing. That's the razor's edge right there. It's a safe and welcoming place for every type of birth.
Yeah, the OR is definitely not that, I think. And I can understand why it wasn't really set up for it.
No, Absolutely. It's set up for an emergency.
Right.
It's set up to save lives,
exactly.
Which I appreciate.
Of course. Yes. Not getting the skin to skin with her right afterwards. But then also she was in the little bassinet thing. They gave her to my husband and then they were dealing with me. So for 15 minutes afterwards, I didn't see them and he was with her, which is fine. But I was like totally left out. And I kind of expected that. Like I knew that was going to happen and I still wasn't really prepared for, I'm not with my husband and my baby right now. I know I need to be here, but I'm not with my husband and my baby right now. And then when I got to post-op, I was laying down and she was in the bassinet next to the bed and they wouldn't let me hold her because they wouldn't let me sit up. And so for like 45 minutes afterwards, I'm just kind of putting my hand over the edge of the bassinet to like touch her. And just really, 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 I'm like, please let me hold my baby. So that was really hard as well. Eventually I did get there, but it wasn't the post-op experience I was expecting either.
What was the reason that you couldn't hold your baby at that time?
They said you need to be able to sit up and you can't sit up yet because you just came out of surgery.
Did they try to sit you up?
Mm-mm.
That's not a practice that I'm accustomed to, but if you do have an anesthesia consult for the next delivery, I wonder if you can ask them about that, because that's really important to be able to bond with your baby after delivery. I mean, I get that sometimes in the OR, they've got some stuff to do both on you and baby,
Right.
But in recovery, I would expect you to be able to hold your baby. That's
Okay.
rough.
Good to know for next time.
Yeah. I don't know the hospital policy, but I would think that that's something that you can talk with your OB and see if your OB can advocate. I usually hand the baby right to the mom after we're in the PACU, as long as mom is stable. Mom sits up a little bit and we do skin to skin, and we're all in there pretty much constantly. You don't really leave them alone for more than like a minute or two to go grab meds, and then dad's there too.
So that was another thing. I was completely overwhelmed and it bothered me in the moment, but considering everything else that happened afterward, it became sort of a side note. Definitely not what I expected.
I really hope that even if your water breaks at 36 weeks again, I hope that you get the chance to talk to people ahead of time and get the plan that you want. I wish that you didn't have to go through all of these things to know what to ask. But again, if someone hears your story, you might prevent that from happening to someone else.
Yeah. And that's really my hope by sharing. And it's so hard to know what to advocate for until after it's happened. That was my experience because I went in fully expecting that I would need to advocate for something. I just didn't know exactly what that would be. And then it happened. And then it's like, oh, well, of course I needed to ask that question, or of course I needed to say this to this person.
Duh. You're supposed to plan for everything. Didn't you know that? That's your job.
Right. Yeah. And that is a significant burden, I think, placed on parents to know what they need to advocate for when in the midst of all of this other stuff that's going on. It was completely overwhelming and life-changing experience. It was also, in a way, exactly what I expected in both a positive and a negative. I expected the OR visit. I expected the numbness from the down. I expected the anesthesiologist to be what he was. That was fine. He was great. He did his job. I didn't feel a thing. Great. I expected a lot of it. And then there were these huge gaping holes that I did not expect and could not have prepared for. And I think that's where trauma comes from. I'm a very big advocate for people having relationships with their doctors. And I get, even with the practice that I'm currently at for my OB, I prefer to see one doctor. And of course, they have a policy for pregnant women. You have to see everybody. So in case, exactly what happened to me happens, you will be aware of whomever walks in and delivers your baby. It's a great policy, but when I have to go over my story 5 times, which is essentially what happened with the nursing staff, right? I felt like I was reintroducing myself and talking in circles and saying the same thing 10 times to 5 different people. And so that's one of the reasons that as a person and as a mom, I've always been like, I need to see one doctor who knows my story. And I know that that's not always possible, especially in emergency situations. But if you can have a relationship with a doctor whom you trust, that is a huge protective factor, I think.
I wonder if your doctor would be able to help you sit down and write. I know birth plans are normally what you would expect with a vaginal delivery, but they can be done for C-sections as well. That way you wouldn't have the emotional burden of having to reintroduce yourself. If the staff had something that talks about what you want to share as the history, not what everybody's sharing about you, not what the doctor's put in a note, not what the physical therapist has put for your plan of care, but what you are hoping to gain from the experience and take back some of your power, that might be a little bit less of an emotional burden for you.
Yeah, I think next time I will do that. And it's interesting because I thought I had a birth plan.
Yeah, you were like, I want a safe birth, which
Right.
is my favorite birth plan, let me just tell you.
Right.
Because if anything goes out the window, safety is the first thing that I want to make sure that we put on the list.
Right. Safety and health for mom and baby. That's it. And I wanted a C-section for various physical reasons. And my doctor agreed to that. Absolutely. She's like, if it helps you be less anxious because of my own birth trauma that I experienced as an infant, and also just for my own peace of mind. So she was very supportive of the elective C-section. We're going to put that in your chart. It's going to be fine. And it really was. Did not see the postpartum piece coming and really should have planned more for that.
That's not your job.
You
did the best you could. Yeah.
I appreciate that. I was really worried about the OR and the procedure and the anesthesia and all that other stuff. And that was not the problem. That was afterwards. So yeah, bringing more attention to the birth experience doesn't stop when you give birth.
Right. Recovery is important. Support is important. Having a support system is important.
That was another thing, interestingly, you bring up support system. I generally have a huge one. I have a huge family presence here. But, interestingly, my parents had taken a trip to Alaska.
Because of course they have.
Because it had been planned a year in advance. And, we didn't know we were going to be pregnant. That's fair. And, you have 3 more weeks. That's fine. We're going to go. Yeah, well, babies don't go according to our plans. But, so here I am in the hospital with just my husband and 0 family. And so again, not the postpartum experience that I really had thought about having, because I kind of imagined my parents being there to visit me in the hospital and stuff. So I didn't get that. And it was very isolating. And also apparently in Alaska, they have no cell service.
Is that a general thing for Alaska, or was that just what happened with them?
It was a cruise.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I had no idea that Alaska didn't have cell phones.
I think it had more to do with the cruise than anything else.
That sounds right.
Yeah. But my husband's texting them like, hey, Jane's in labor. And we're getting like, the cell service customer is out of range. No voicemail, nothing. It was very, very isolating and not their fault at all. But the nurses were going, well, where's your family? I'm like, they're in Alaska.
Siberia, you know.
Everybody.
Might as well have been on the moon.
Right.
So just to point out, the next time, you're going to have another little one that needs to be cared for while you're in the hospital.
Right.
So
it's going to be, 2-ish or something,
Yeah, maybe some backups to the backup in that situation would be helpful.
Definitely we'll go into some planning for that.
Well, Jane, I have really enjoyed talking to you about your experience. I think it will be something that a lot of people can find very educational and helpful in healing.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being able to share, and I'm hopeful that, it will help someone else. And it's also helped me to share. So
good. I'm glad you've had that experience. To help more moms find this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review to tell me what you think. To find more information about guests from each episode, please see the show notes at birthjourneyspodcast.buzzsprout.com. There you can also learn how to follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for listening. I'm honored to be a part of your birth journey. Thank you so much for tuning into my podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Don't forget to share the podcast with a friend who can benefit from the valuable insights that we share here. And if you could take a moment to leave a 5-star rating and review, it would mean the world to me. If you're ready to work one-on-one with me to embark on a transformational journey towards a confident and empowered hospital birth experience, go to kellyhof.com/empowered and enroll in my Empowered Hospital Birth Coaching Program. Together, we'll create a roadmap to a birth experience that you'll cherish forever. That's KELLYHOF.com/empowered. Let's make your birth experience extraordinary.